Some mysteries don't end when an investigation ends. They wait, quietly, patiently, and years later, they come back to haunt anyone who dares to look too closely. What if I told you that tonight's video isn't just about 5 unsolved mysteries? It's about 5 real cases that shattered families, confused the world's best investigators, and left behind questions that still have no answers. But here's what makes these stories truly terrifying. What if everything people believed about these cases was wrong? Because in every one of these mysteries, there came a moment when investigators thought they were finally about to solve it. Then, without warning, a single clue appeared that changed everything. A witness spoke, evidence surfaced, a forgotten detail was uncovered, and suddenly the entire investigation turned upside down. What looked like the final answer became an even darker mystery. How can someone disappear without leaving a trace? Why would a child willingly trust a stranger? Was the killer hiding in plain sight all along? Or did investigators unknowingly miss the one piece of evidence that could have solved everything? Tonight, we'll uncover the chilling stories of Asha Degree, Amy Miljevic, Michaela Garrett, Morgan Nick, and JonBenet Ramsey. Each case begins with what seems like an ordinary day. Then, in just a few moments, everything changes forever. The deeper you go into these stories, the stranger they become. Every clue raises another question. Every answer creates a bigger mystery. And just when you think you figured out what happened, a shocking twist will completely change the direction of the case, forcing you to question everything you believed only moments before. So before we begin, ask yourself one question. If these mysteries have remained unsolved for decades, what is the one truth that everyone has overlooked? Because once we start, there may be no turning back. Think of what your action means. One subscribe means one more voice demanding justice. One like means one more person joining that fight. One comment means one more sign of support for her family. When you subscribe to Top Mysterious Cases, you are helping us spread awareness worldwide. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share this video so that CAE's story never fades.
Well, this month now marks more than 26 years since anyone has seen or heard from Asha Degree. She disappeared from her Cleveland County home at 9 years old.
The mysterious night. Imagine a warm summer evening, the kind where the air smells like fresh-cut grass and the sky is filled with a gentle, flickering glow of fireflies. It was June 9th, 1995, in the quiet town of Alma, Arkansas. Families gathered at a local Little League baseball field, cheering, laughing, and sharing moments that were supposed to become happy memories. Among them was a mother and her vibrant 6-year-old daughter. Around 10:30 p.m., as the game neared its end, the little girl begged her mother to let her go catch fireflies with her friends just a short distance away. Her mother hesitated, a mother's natural instinct whispering caution, but seeing the other children playing safely, she gently smiled and said yes. It is a decision that would break her heart for the rest of her life. Just 15 minutes later, the children began shaking sand out of their shoes near the parking lot. This little girl stood alone by her mother's car, completely unaware of the shadow watching her from the darkness. Her friends noticed a strange man speaking to her. Minutes later, the baseball game ended. The crowd cleared, and the friends returned to the stands. But she wasn't with them. When her mother rushed to the car, expecting to see her daughter's sweet face, the area was empty. Only the quiet hum of the night remained. She had vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but an empty parking space and a parent's worst nightmare. In my opinion, what makes this case truly unbearable is a sudden, quiet theft of innocence. It reminds us how fragile life is. One moment a child is laughing under the stars, and the next, a family is shattered forever. Official investigation records from the FBI and local police show that decades of painful waiting followed, filled with false leads, empty wells, and agonizing silence, until modern DNA science recently shattered the cold case wide open, pointing directly to a dark red truck and a long-dead suspect. But to understand how this tragedy deeply rewrote laws and inspired a nationwide fight to protect missing children, we have to look back at the beginning. We have to ask ourselves, who was this innocent soul who went to catch fireflies and never came home? Let me tell you exactly who she was. Who was Asha Degree? To understand the heartbreaking mystery of that stormy night, we first have to look at the little girl who walked out into it. Her name was Asha Degree. She was just 9 years old, living in Shelby, North Carolina, with a family that loved her fiercely. Esha wasn't a rebellious child, nor was she the type to wander off. She was a sweet, shy fourth grader who loved basketball, excelled in school, and was deeply terrified of the dark and loud thunderstorms. Her parents raised her and her older brother in a protective, tight-knit home. They didn't even have a computer in the house, shielding their kid from the dangers of the outside world. Esha was a girl of routine, known for her beautiful smile and her close bond with her family. In my opinion, this is exactly what makes a story pierce your heart so deeply. When an adventurous or troubled child goes missing, it is a tragedy. But when a child who screams at the slightest rumble of thunder willingly packs a backpack and walks into a freezing rainstorm alone in the dead of night, it completely defies human logic. It makes you realize that something deeply unnatural must have been pulling her out of that house. Official documents from law enforcement files describe Esha as an incredibly disciplined child. Yet, on Valentine's Day morning in 2000, her bedroom was empty. She had quietly stepped outside into a pitch-black, freezing rainstorm, leaving her warm bed behind. Why would a little girl who was afraid of the dark leave the safety of her home to walk along a lonely, unlit highway completely on her own? To find that answer, we have to piece together her final moments under that roof. We have to look closely at the unsettling clues left behind in her bedroom and follow her footprints into the freezing rain. Let's step back into the shadows of her home and look at the last hours before she vanished. The last hours before she vanished. The hours leading up to Esha's disappearance feel like a quiet, slow-motion nightmare. February 13th, 2000, was a typical Sunday for the Degree family. They attended church together, and later that afternoon, Esha and her brother went to stay with an aunt down the street while their parents ran errands. When they returned, the sky grew dark, and a fierce storm rolled in, knocking out the power to the neighborhood. In the dim glow of candlelight, the family talked and laughed until the lights flickered back on around 12:30 a.m. With the storm still howling outside, Harold Degree, Esha's father, checked on his children one last time before going to bed around 2:30 a.m. He saw Esha sleeping soundly in her bed, wrapped in the safety of her blanket. Her older brother, who shared the room, remembers hearing her bed squeak a little later, assuming she was just tossing and turning. In my opinion, the most heartbreaking part of this timeline is that everything seemed perfectly normal. There were no tears, no arguments, and no warning signs. Yet, somewhere in those silent, icy hours between 2:30 a.m. and dawn, while her entire family slept just a few feet away, a terrifying shift occurred. Esha quietly got out of bed. She walked over to her closet and picked up her black book bag, which she had secretly packed earlier with a few changes of clothes, a house key, and her favorite basketball outfit. Moving like a ghost in the dark, she crept past her sleeping brother, opened the front door, and stepped directly out into the freezing, pouring rain. What could possibly drive a child to leave her safe, warm bed to face a violent storm alone? We may never truly understand the thoughts running through her mind as she closed that door behind her. But as she left her driveway, her small footprints led her away from the safety of her family and straight toward the cold, concrete edges of a lonely road. Let us follow those footprints into the dark, where unsuspecting drivers were about to witness a sight that would haunt them for decades: the highway sightings. The highway sightings. The dark, freezing blackness of North Carolina Highway 18 was barely lit by the headlights of passing cars between 3:45 a.m. and 4:15 a.m. The rain was coming down hard, blurring the vision of drivers struggling to see through the storm. Then out of nowhere, an unbelievable sight appeared in the dim glare. A tiny, vulnerable figure was walking along the shoulder of the road. At least 2 different drivers spotted her. One trucker was so shocked by the sight of a lone child out in a freezing storm that he circled back 3 separate times, desperately trying to get a closer look or offer help. But as his large truck pulled near, the frightened little girl suddenly turned, ran off the asphalt, and vanished straight into the dark, thick tree line of the surrounding woods. This is the exact moment that shatters your heart into pieces. Imagine being that tiny, freezing girl, completely soaked to the bone, running blindly into a dense, terrifying forest in the dead of night because you are too scared of the people trying to save you. It makes you wonder what kind of deep, overwhelming fear or promise drove her to keep running away from help. Official police investigation records from the FBI show that this stretch of Highway 18 was the absolute last place Esha Degree was ever seen alive by the public. When the sun finally rose hours later, her family woke up to an empty room, completely unaware that their little girl was already lost somewhere in those dark woods. The moment her mother realized she was gone, a wave of panic swept through the house, sparking an urgent, frantic effort to find her. Let us look at how a quiet neighborhood turned into a massive search field as an entire community rushed out into the storm to find a missing girl. The massive search. When the alarm finally broke the morning silence, reality crashed down on the DeGree family like a tidal wave. Asha was gone. Within hours, the peaceful community of Shelby transformed into a frantic, chaotic rescue zone. Hundreds of local volunteers, police officers, and federal agents rushed to the area, moving shoulder to shoulder through the dense, muddy woods surrounding Highway 18. They braved the freezing wind and soaked ground, desperately calling out her name, hoping to hear a tiny voice call back. Search dogs sniffed through the thick brush, while helicopters circled above, cutting through the gray sky. Every single person searching felt a deep, agonizing weight in their chest, knowing that a vulnerable 9-year-old girl had been exposed to the freezing rain for hours. The sheer scale of this search shows the beautiful, raw humanity of a small town refusing to let a child fade away. Complete strangers wept as they searched under porches and deep inside cold drainage ditches. Yet, despite covering miles of rough terrain and combing through every single thicket, the earth seemed completely silent. It was as if the stormy night had swallowed her whole, leaving the massive search party with nothing but cold hands and broken hearts. According to official law enforcement archives, the ground search officially turned up empty-handed. But just as hope began to slip away, the forest floor slowly began to whisper. Deep within the shadows of a nearby shed, investigators stumbled upon a collection of deeply unsettling items that shattered the theory of a simple runaway. Let us look closely at these strange clues left behind, which turned a desperate rescue mission into a dark, twist-filled criminal investigation. Strange clues left behind. As the ground search quietly wound down, the forest began to reveal dark secrets that made investigators freeze. Inside a dusty shed near Highway 18, searchers found Asha's hair ribbons, a Mickey Mouse hairband, and a marker pen. Someone had left them there. But the most horrifying discovery came 18 months later, and over 26 miles away, in a completely different county. A construction worker digging into the damp earth struck something plastic. Buried deep in the dirt was Asha's black book bag, completely wrapped in heavy, black trash bags. This is the exact moment where your heart drops and a cold chill runs down your spine. A running child might drop a hair bow, but a 9-year-old does not dig a hole in the earth, place her backpack inside, and wrap it securely in multiple trash bags to protect her from the rain. Someone else did that. Someone deliberately buried her memory in the dark, trying to hide a terrible secret from the rest of the world. Official FBI reports state that inside the buried bag, investigators found items that didn't even belong to Asha, including a children's book by Dr. Seuss and a concert T-shirt. These bizarre, haunting clues completely shattered the idea that she simply ran away because she was unhappy. Instead, they pointed to a calculated, intentional crime. These confusing discoveries didn't solve the mystery. They only made it darker. They opened up a massive divide between investigators, pushing them into a fierce debate about what truly happened to her on that highway. Let us dive deep into conflicting theories that still divide investigators to this day, as they try to understand the hidden forces that pulled a sweet girl from her home. Theories that still divide investigators. The strange items hidden in the shed and the buried backpack completely changed the direction of the case, splitting investigators into two deeply divided sides. For over 2 decades, experienced detectives and federal agents have looked at the exact same evidence and walked away with completely opposite ideas about what actually happened on that lonely stretch of highway. The first major theory argues that Asha left her house completely on her own, under the influence of someone she trusted. Supporters of this idea look at her neatly packed backpack as proof. They believe a 9-year-old girl would only pack extra clothing and walk out into a dangerous, dark storm if she had been deeply groomed, tricked, or promised a special adventure by an older person. According to this view, Asha was walking along Highway 18 to reach a specific meeting place, completely unaware of the trap waiting for her. The second theory argues that Asha ran away spontaneously due to an emotional trigger, perhaps upset over a recent basketball game loss, and was simply snatched by a passing stranger. Those who hold this view believe the truck drivers genuinely saw a confused, lost child who panicked and ran into the dark woods to hide, where a predatory person unfortunately crossed her path. The deep disagreement over whether she was lured by an insider or grabbed by a random stranger has stalled the case for generations. Every time a new tip arrives, it pulls the investigation back and forth between these two dark paths, leaving the ultimate truth buried out of reach. This brings us to a frustrating question. With so many eyes on that road and so many clues pulled from the earth, why does this case remain completely unsolved to this day? Why this case remains unsolved? The case of Asha Degree remains unsolved because it sits in a painful void where concrete evidence ends and maddening mystery begins. Despite thousands of tips, multiple FBI searches, and the recovery of her deeply buried backpack, investigators have never been able to find a clear, solid connection between her quiet life inside her home and her sudden appearance on that wet, lonely highway. The primary obstacle is a complete lack of a crime scene. The storm washed away any footprints or tire tracks from Highway 18, and the items recovered from the shed and the buried bag were exposed to the damp earth for far too long, degrading vital DNA and fingerprint evidence. Investigators are left with a story missing its most crucial chapters. Who was waiting for her in the dark? And where did she go after running off the road? For her heartbroken family, each passing year is a reminder of the cruel silence that surrounds her memory. This agonizing block is exactly what happens when the trail goes completely cold. When a child vanishes without a single trace, the world keeps spinning, but time stands completely still for the loved ones left behind. They are left waiting for a single voice to break the silence, or a new piece of technology to unlock the past. But sometimes a case doesn't go cold because a child walked away into a storm. Sometimes the mystery begins right inside the family home, breaking a quiet morning with a sound that changes a family forever. Let us turn the page to a completely different kind of nightmare, where the danger didn't wait out on a dark highway, but arrived through the wires of a kitchen telephone. Let us listen closely to a phone call that changed everything.
It was an in-depth look on the life and death of Amy Mihalovic, a 10-year-old from Bay Village who went missing in 1989, only to turn up months later in a field.
A phone call that changed everything. The heavy, dark silence of a missing child case often begins with a single moment of absolute confusion. In the quiet suburbs of Bay Village, Ohio, that confusion arrived through a kitchen telephone. It was an ordinary afternoon when the phone rang, breaking the routine of a normal school day. A polite, calm male voice spoke to a young girl, pretending to be a thoughtful friend of her mother. He claimed her mom had just received a big promotion at work and needed help picking out a special celebratory gift. The caller was gentle, patient, and incredibly convincing. He laid out a detailed plan, instructing the girl to meet him secretly after school so they could surprise her mother together. To a young, innocent heart, this didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an exciting, helpful mission. The caller manipulated her natural kindness, explicitly warning her not to tell her father or anyone else, as it would ruin the beautiful surprise. That single, calculated telephone conversation shattered the safety of an entire community. With a few soft words, a predator successfully bypassed locked doors and parental protection, pulling a child into a trap without ever forcing his way inside. When the phone clicked shut, a countdown began, leading directly to a quiet shopping center where a ghost was waiting. To truly understand how the simple trick worked so perfectly, we have to look closely at the innocent soul who answered that fateful ring. Let us step back into that quiet Ohio suburb and meet Amy Mihalovic. Meet Amy Mihalovic, who was the innocent little girl at the other end of that deceptive phone call. Before she became a haunting headline, she was simply Amy Renee Mihalovic, a bright, 10-year-old fifth grader who filled her family's Ohio home with laughter, big dreams, and an unmistakable love for life. Born in the winter of 1978, Amy was a child of pure kindness. She was a dedicated student at Bay Middle School, known for her gentle soul and her profound love for animals. She spent her weekends riding horses, proudly wearing her favorite riding boots, and talking about her dreams of future. She carried her schoolwork in a simple denim backpack, decorated with a binder that read Buick, Best in Class, small, ordinary tokens of a beautifully normal childhood. But what made Amy so special was her deep devotion to her family, especially her mother, Margaret McNulty. She was the kind of daughter who would do anything to make her mom smile. It was this exact beautiful trait, her fierce love and eagerness to please her mother, that a heartless predator weaponized against her. On October 27, 1989, Amy walked out of her school, completely unaware that her innocence had made her a target. She was just a little girl stepping into a trap because she wanted to buy a surprise gift for the mom she loved so dearly. When she arrived at the Bay Square shopping center, she was seen talking to a man before vanishing into thin air, leaving behind a family whose hearts were instantly shattered. Years later, the grief would claim her mother, who passed away with a broken heart, never knowing justice. Amy was a precious light put out far too soon, and her absence leaves a wound in Bay Village that time can never heal. But how did this monster know exactly how to reach her? To understand the chilling precision of this trap, we must examine how the killer gathered his information, leading us directly to the fake gift story. The fake gift story. The deceptive trap that stole Amy's life was not a sudden act of impulse. It was a cold, calculated plot born from a chillingly specific secret weapon. Information. Investigators later discovered that in the weeks leading up to that dark autumn day, several other young girls in the neighboring suburb of North Olmsted received identical, eerie phone calls. The voice on the other end always knew their names, their phone numbers, and crucially, where their mothers worked. For years, police desperately searched for the leak. How did a predator obtain the unlisted phone numbers of innocent children? The heartbreaking answer was found in a place of pure joy. All of the targeted girls, including Amy, had recently visited the local Lake Erie Nature and Science Center. Right by the front door sat a simple visitor's logbook, meant to welcome families. In her sweet, neat handwriting, Amy had signed her name, unwittingly leaving behind the breadcrumbs a monster would use to hunt her. Armed with her private details, the killer called Amy's home. He did not sound like a monster. He sounded warm, familiar, and kind. He told Amy that her mother, Margaret, had just received a wonderful promotion at work. He claimed he was a co-worker and needed a child's help to secretly buy a celebratory gift. He told Amy she was the only one who could help make her mother happy, swearing her to absolute secrecy so the surprise wouldn't be ruined. Amy, driven entirely by her massive heart and a desire to celebrate her mom, believed every single word. This toxic lie completely bypassed her defense instincts, transforming a dangerous meeting into a loving errand. With the trap set, Amy agreed to slip away quietly after school. She thought she was heading toward a happy celebration, completely unaware that she was walking directly into the day Amy disappeared. The day Amy disappeared. Friday, October 27, 1989, began like any other beautiful, crisp autumn day in Bay Village. 10-year-old Amy rode her bicycle to Bay Middle School, her heart light and full of excitement for her school yearbook photo retakes. After her classes ended, Amy made her usual daily check-in phone call to her mother's office at Cleveland Magazine. She happily chatted about her day, mentioning that her choir tryout had gone incredibly well. Her mother, Margaret, smiled at her daughter's sweet voice, expecting her to head straight home. She had no idea this would be the very last time she would ever hear her little girl's voice. Instead of riding home, Amy walked with her friends to the nearby Bay Square shopping center. In her sweet, trusting mind, she wasn't doing anything wrong. She was executing a top-secret mission to surprise her mom. Around 2:20 p.m., two of Amy's classmates witnessed her standing in the parking lot. She was speaking with a white male estimated to be in his 30s, who appeared calm and approachable. Because the man was well-spoken and polite, the young onlookers simply assumed he was a family member or a close friend. They watched as Amy quietly walked through the parking lot alongside him, completely trusting his deadly lie. In a single, silent moment, she vanished into the autumn afternoon, leaving her bicycle behind. When Amy didn't arrive home, panic instantly gripped her family, sparking a desperate, massive search that mobilized the entire community. For months, an entire nation prayed for her safe return, holding onto a fragile thread of hope. But that hope was brutally shattered on a freezing winter morning, leading straight into the discovery that shocked America. The discovery that shocked America. For 104 agonizing days, the people of Bay Village lived in an absolute state of fear and prayer. The haunting face of 10-year-old Amy looked down from thousands of missing person posters plastered across the country. Her parents survived each grueling minute on nothing but the fragile hope that their little girl was still alive somewhere, waiting to be rescued. But on the morning of February 8, 1990, that hope was brutally torn away. A local jogger was moving down the snow-dusted edges of Township Road 1181 in rural Ashland County, Ohio, about 50 miles away from Amy's hometown. In a cold, remote farm field, the runner spotted something truly heartbreaking lying near the road. It was Amy's small, lifeless body. The forensic details from the Cuyahoga County coroner paints a deeply tragic picture of her final hours. Amy had been cruelly taken from this world shortly after her abduction. Her cause of death ruled a homicide from head trauma and stab wounds to her neck. Chillingly, the monster who took her had stripped her of her most cherished belongings. Her favorite black horse-riding boots, her turquoise horsehead earrings, her denim backpack, and her Bic binder were all missing. The killer took them as twisted souvenirs, items that have never been found to this day. The agonizing pain of this discovery tore a permanent hole through the fabric of the community and broke her family's spirit forever. This was no longer just a missing child case. It was a race against time to catch a cold-blooded killer. As local police and the FBI converged on that freezing field, the grief quickly transformed into a desperate hunt for justice, launching the investigation. The discovery of Amy's body turned a frantic rescue mission into one of the most massive homicide investigations in Ohio's history. The Bay Village Police Department and the FBI immediately joined forces, determined to trace the monster who had slipped through their fingers. Investigators knew that to find the killer, they had to understand the tiny, silent clues left behind on the cold ground of Ashland County. Forensic experts painstakingly gathered every microscopic shred of evidence. Among the grass, they discovered a distinct olive-green blanket and a faded curtain. Years later, advanced laboratory testing would reveal a detail that breaks the heart. These items carried tiny hairs that matched Amy's beloved family dog. This meant the killer had likely broken into Amy's world, using everyday fabrics from an environment she trusted to wrap and conceal her small body before discarding her by the roadside. Furthermore, the coroner discovered tiny, unusual yellow and gold-colored fibers scattered across her clothing. These threads didn't belong to Amy. They were the physical fingerprints of the killer's environment, likely shedding from the carpeting or interior of the vehicle used to steal her away. Over the decades, detectives conducted more than 20,000 intense interviews, following thousands of agonizing, dead-end leads across the country. They manually cross-referenced visitor logs, chased phantom phone calls, and collected DNA samples from hundreds of men, but the identity of the polite voice on the telephone remained a ghost. The exhaustive search revealed a criminal who was terrifyingly organized, careful, and deeply familiar with the quiet backroads of rural Ohio. Yet, as the years bled into decades, the cold, scientific evidence began pointing toward a small group of individuals, bringing investigators face-to-face with the prime suspects. Over the decades, investigators have looked into thousands of men, trying to unmask a deceptive voice on the telephone. Among the long list of names, a few specific individuals made the hairs on the backs of detectives' necks stand up. One such person was a notorious identity thief named Robert Ivan Nichols, who lived under the stolen name Joseph Newton Chandler III. He was a man wrapped in complete secrecy, whose strange behavior and proximity to the area led the FBI to spend years trying to connect his timeline to Amy's final days. But on the 31st anniversary of that tragic winter discovery, a deeply chilling breakthrough shook the entire investigation. A woman stepped forward to implicate her former boyfriend, a man who was 64 years old at the time of the update. Her detailed account to authorities exposed a dark, hidden truth. She revealed that on the exact afternoon Amy vanished, her then-boyfriend was completely, inexplicably missing from their home. Late that night, he had called her in a visible panic, anxiously asking if the local news was already broadcasting updates about a missing girl from Bay Village. The connections only grew more terrifying. This man worked in the exact same city where Amy was taken, and his own niece sat in the very same grade at school. When confronted by the FBI, he made highly suspicious statements, even admitting he might have crossed paths with Amy's mother in the past. He ultimately failed a polygraph test, and 2 eyewitnesses from the shopping center parking lot positively identified him from a classic lineup. Even the vehicle he drove matched the description of a car spotted near the Ashland County dump site. Shockingly, the gold-colored carpet fibers found on Amy's clothing perfectly matched the interior of his vehicle. Yet, despite this mountain of circumstantial evidence, a formal arrest has never been made, leaving a killer still walking free. A killer still walking free. More than 3 decades have passed since Amy Renee Miljevic was stolen from the world, yet the most heartbreaking reality of this case remains unchanged. Her killer is still walking free. He has slept in a warm bed every night, while Amy's family was left to drown in an ocean of grief. The devastating weight of this injustice literally broke her home. Amy's mother, Margaret McNulty, spent her remaining years fighting to protect other children through missing youth funds, but the agony of a broken heart was too heavy to carry. She passed away in 2001 at the young age of 54, never getting a chance to look her daughter's killer in the eye or see justice served. To this day, Amy's favorite horse riding boots, her turquoise horsehead earrings, and her denim backpack are still out there, hidden away by a monster as trophies of a stolen childhood. The FBI's $27,000 reward remains unclaimed, and the golden carpet fibers continue to sit in a quiet evidence locker, waiting for a definitive match. Amy's story is a painful reminder how a predator can use our purest, most loving instincts, like a child desires to surprise her mother, to pull off the ultimate act of cruelty. Amy should be a grown woman today, living out her dreams, but instead, she remains a frozen memory of a little girl who trusted the wrong voice. The terrifying truth is that monsters do not always lurk in the dark. Sometimes they stand in broad daylight, wearing polite smiles and carrying well-rehearsed lies. As Amy's case grows colder, we are forced to realize that her story is just one of many where a peaceful community was torn apart by an unexpected horror. It makes you wonder how many other families are out there right now, living through the exact same nightmare. In fact, in a completely different neighborhood, another innocent family was about to learn just how quickly safety can evaporate, beginning a normal day turned into a nightmare.
Very grateful to be joined tonight with the mother of Michaela Garrett, who is joining us from San Francisco, California, Sharon Murch. Sharon, thank you so much for coming on tonight. I have so many questions to ask you, but first want to know, how did you find out that Michaela went missing?
I was in the kitchen washing the breakfast dishes, and Michaela hadn't been gone for very long, not long enough for me to worry about her, and I heard shouting outside, and Michaela's dad was working on the car in the driveway, and he came into the house and poked his head in the kitchen, and...
A normal day turned into a nightmare. The morning of Saturday, November 19th, 1988, began like any other beautiful weekend for 9-year-old Michaela Joy Garrett. The sun was shining over Hayward, California, and the world felt entirely safe. At around 10 a.m., Michaela and her best friend, Trina, decided to take a quick 2-block ride on their scooters to the local Rainbow Market on Mission Boulevard. It was a completely routine, innocent errand. Just 2 little girls heading down the street to buy sodas and snacks, laughing under the morning sun. It was a day meant for childhood memories, but in a matter of mere minutes, their innocent world would shatter completely, turning a normal day into a living nightmare. After stepping out of the market, the girls realized they had accidentally left their scooters near the side door. When they turned back, Michaela noticed that one of the scooters had been intentionally moved further down into the parking lot, deliberately left right beside an older, run-down, cream-colored sedan. It was a cold, calculated trap. The moment Michaela bent down to grasp the handlebars, the door of the car swung open. A man stepped out, grabbed her tightly around the waist, and forcefully threw her into the vehicle as she screamed in absolute terror. Trina stood frozen in utter shock, watching her best friend being stolen away in broad daylight. Within seconds, the car sped away, swallowing Michaela into the unknown, and leaving behind nothing but a lonely scooter bearing a single, unidentified fingerprint. The immediate aftermath was plagued by confusion, as a mistaken description from a store clerk caused police to search for the wrong suspect during the most critical 48 hours. While thousands of volunteers distributed 42,000 flyers and a devastated community tied ribbons to a tree near the market, The trail grew cold. Decades passed with false leads, agonizing dead ends, and a mother's unyielding heartbreak. For 32 agonizing years, the identity of the monster remained a mystery until a shocking forensic breakthrough in December 2020 changed everything. A single fingerprint match finally gave a name to the horror, forcing us to ask, who was Michaela? Who was Michaela? To understand the absolute gravity of the horror that unfolded in that parking lot, we first have to look at the bright soul who was taken from us. Michaela Joy Garrick was not just a case number, a name on a legal transcript, or a faded face printed on the side of a grocery store milk carton. She was a beautiful, vibrant 9-year-old girl with a heart full of innocence, soft blonde hair, and deep, expressive eyes. She loved the simple joys of childhood, spending her free weekends riding her scooter around her close-knit neighborhood and laughing with her best friend, Trina. On the morning she disappeared, she was wearing pearl-colored earrings shaped like delicate feathers and a favorite shirt that proudly said Metro across the front. She was a child whose entire life lay beautifully ahead of her, a gentle soul who trusted that the world around her was safe. The loss of Michaela left an unhealable, bleeding wound in the hearts of her family, especially her mother, Sharon. For decades, Sharon refused to let her daughter's memory fade into history, maintaining a deeply emotional blog dedicated entirely to Michaela, pouring her grief and undying love into letters addressed to her missing child. The devastating reality is that Michaela's bright light was abruptly extinguished by a calculating predator who saw an innocent child and chose to inflict total devastation. Her disappearance did not just break a home. It robbed the world of a girl who deserved to grow up, go to college, fall in love, and live out her dreams. Instead, her story became a historical tragedy that would haunt the entire nation for generations. For more than 30 years, the painful question of what truly happened to this sweet girl hung heavily over the community, keeping everyone awake at night. To understand how such a beautiful life could be stolen in the blink of an eye, we have to look directly at the horrifying mechanics of the crime itself, dissecting the terrifying moments of the parking lot abduction. The parking lot abduction. The pure innocence of that Saturday morning evaporated the exact second Michaela and Trina stepped out of the Rainbow Market. Realizing they had left their scooters by the door, they turned back, only to find a devastating sight. Michaela's scooter had been intentionally moved down into the asphalt lot, deliberately placed next to a battered, cream-colored sedan. It was a cold, calculated trap meant to isolate her. As Michaela innocently walked over and bent down to grasp the handlebars, the car door flew open. A man stepped out, wrapped his right arm around her waist, and ruthlessly threw her into the vehicle. Michaela screamed out in absolute terror, fighting with everything she had, but the monster's grip was too tight. Within seconds, the car sped south down Mission Boulevard, disappearing into traffic and leaving behind nothing but an empty parking space and a lonely scooter. Trina stood completely frozen in shock, witnessing her best friend being stolen away in broad daylight. The sheer trauma of that moment was a heavy burden for a child to carry, but she bravely ran back into the store to scream for help. Sadly, the chaos of the immediate aftermath only worsened the tragedy. A well-meaning store clerk dialed 911, but mistakenly described a completely different man in a burgundy car she had seen earlier. This single error caused law enforcement to broadcast a false description to the media, leading police to chase the wrong leads during the most critical 48 hours of the investigation. The precious window to rescue Michaela closed as the wrong information spread, cementing a heartbreaking reality. To truly understand how this initial confusion permanently altered the search, we must look at the devastating testimonies when the witnesses speak out. Witnesses speak out. The early breakdown in communication left the investigation deeply fractured from its very first hours. Trina, the sole eyewitness to her best friend's disappearance, carried a heavy burden that no 9-year-old child should ever have to bear. Her memory was highly detailed, accurate, and completely different from the false descriptions broadcasting over the evening news. Trina clearly described the driver as a white male in his early 20s with a slender build, standing around 6 feet tall. His most memorable, haunting physical characteristics were his dirty, shoulder-length blonde hair, intense, fox-like blue eyes, and a face marred by severe acne or pockmarks. He drove a large, run-down, older model American sedan, cream or tannish gold in color, with a battered front bumper and distinct splatters of dried cement marking its sides. Years later, an emotional Trina appeared on television, recalling the paralyzing terror of hearing Michaela scream, staring helplessly as a friend was forced into the vehicle. "I just stood and watched, frozen in shock," she remembered, her voice trembling under the heavy weight of survival guilt. Her deeply accurate description was eventually used to create a haunting composite sketch that was distributed to every corner of the San Francisco Bay Area. Tragically, because the critical first 48 hours had been entirely wasted looking for a completely different person, the physical trail had grown terrifyingly cold. Trina's words painted a clear picture of a monster hiding in plain sight, but the early delay forced law enforcement to step up their efforts blindly, marking the agonizing beginning of the police investigation. The massive hunt that followed was a chaotic mix of raw desperation, absolute community heartbreak, and a deeply frustrating series of dead ends. Once Trina's correct description was finally made public, the Hayward Police Department and the FBI launched an incredibly intensive search. Helicopters and airplanes combed through the hillsides, parks, and isolated fields of southern Alameda County. Volunteers quickly organized, working around the clock to hand out 42,000 missing person flyers across the neighborhood. Michaela's beautiful face was printed onto countless milk cartons and massive billboards nationwide, ensuring her smile was seen by millions. Even legendary 49ers quarterback Joe Montana stepped up onto a national platform, pleading directly with the public for the safe return of the little girl. Over 5,000 individual tips poured into the police department in just the first 12 months, yet investigators were forced to make a gut-wrenching admission. They were no closer to knowing where Michaela was. The case grew increasingly cruel as time wore on. In 1992, an Indiana prison inmate named Roger Haggard claimed he had buried Michaela's body in a remote field, forcing her family to endure agonizing wait while police spent hours digging through the date, only for the inmate to admit he had entirely made up the story. By 1994, investigators had tracked down over 15,000 leads, tracking them across the globe to dead end after dead end. Decades passed, and the case became a haunting shadow over the town of Hayward. Chief Investigator Robert Lampkin vowed they would travel to any corner of the earth to bring her home. Little did they know, the mystery would sleep for over 20 years before a series of shocking discoveries would bring new evidence years later. The cold passage of time did not erase the memory of Michaela, but it completely transformed the landscape of the investigation. Decades after she was stolen from that parking lot, a series of stunning and deeply painful revelations shook the case to its very core. The first major wave of renewed hope arrived in 2009 with the shocking rescue of J.C. Jugat, who had been kidnapped in California and held captive for 18 agonizing years by Philip Garrido. Because the circumstances of the two abductions were eerily similar, detectives aggressively interviewed Garrido, hoping against hope that Michaela might still be alive somewhere. While that path ultimately proved to be a dead end, it pushed the missing girl's story back into the national spotlight, proving that old secrets could still be unearthed. In 2012, a convicted serial killer named Wesley Shermantine dropped a bombshell from death row, claiming his speed freak killer's partner, Lauren Herzog, perfectly matched the original sketch of Michaela's abductor. This terrifying tip led law enforcement to a deeply heartbreaking scene, an abandoned dark well in rural Linden, California. Deep inside that makeshift graveyard, search teams uncovered thousands of scattered bone fragments and a tiny pair of Mary Jane's shoes, identical to the ones Michaela wore on the morning she vanished. For months, her family waited in a state of suspended animation, weeping and praying for answers, only for advanced DNA profiling to reveal the remains belonged to another missing teenager. The physical evidence had failed them once again, leaving the family stranded in their endless grief. Yet, just as it seemed the darkness would win, a shocking breakthrough in forensic technology finally unmasked the true face of the predator, leading us directly to the final, devastating truth of what really happened. For over 32 years, the question of what truly happened to Michaela lay buried under an ocean of false leads and devastating silence. The agonizing heartbreak surrounding her disappearance seemed destined to remain an eternal mystery, leaving a mother's arms forever empty. However, science quietly advanced while the killer thought he had gotten away with a perfect crime. On December 21, 2020, a sudden wave of grief and relief washed over the community of Hayward. The police department, alongside the FBI, made a historic announcement that broke the hearts of true crime followers everywhere. They had finally found her abductor. The ultimate breakthrough did not come from a dynamic confession or an eyewitness tip. It came from a microscopic piece of evidence saved from that very first morning. A single partial fingerprint left behind on the handlebars of Michaela's abandoned scooter was run through advanced, modern forensic databases. The print yielded a definitive match to David Misch, a brutal predator who was already serving a life sentence in prison for a 1989 murder, and who was also facing charges for the gruesome 1986 killings of two best friends in Fremont, California. The realization of what Michaela faced in her final moments is a reality that makes tears flow naturally. Misch had been hunting in the area, using the scooter as a twisted trap to steal a piece of pure innocence in broad daylight. While the identification brought a monster to justice, it offered no physical peace. Michaela's remains were never recovered, leaving her family with a lifelong scar and profound transition into the mystery that refuses to end. The mystery that refuses to end. Even with a suspect finally named in a court of law, a profound and heavy silence still hangs over the town of Hayward. For Michaela's mother, Sharon, and the community that loved her, a legal charge on a piece of paper cannot replace a missing child. True justice requires bringing a soul home. Yet decades later, Michaela's physical whereabouts remain completely unknown. The spot where she was stolen on Mission Boulevard has become a sacred space of remembrance. Every single year, family, friends, and strangers gather at the exact location to tie new ribbons alongside the faded, weathered ones on a nearby tree, keeping her memory alive in a world that quickly forgets. Over 35 years of collective grief are tied to that roadside tree, a visual reminder that for a mother's heart, the passage of time does absolutely nothing to heal an open wound. The pain lives on because the finality of a proper resting place has been cruelly denied. David Misch remains behind bars, but the absolute truth of where he hid Michaela continues to sleep in the dark. Sharon still maintains a deeply moving blog, writing letters to her missing daughter as if she might read them tomorrow, ensuring the world never forgets the bright, innocent 9-year-old girl with the feather earrings. This agonizing, endless loop of unanswered questions serves as a reminder how a single morning can shatter a family forever. It is a haunting legacy that forces us to look back at the very beginning of this nightmare, to the terrifying moment when a regular Saturday morning turned into a tragedy, and she vanished in seconds.
Surrounding the disappearance of Morgan Nick. She, of course, vanished from that Alma ballpark in June of 1995.
She vanished in seconds. It is a terrifying reality that a human life can be completely altered in a single moment. On the warm evening of June 9th, 1995, 6-year-old Morgan Nick was enjoying a peaceful summer night that would ultimately break a community's heart. Morgan and her mother, Colleen, had traveled from their home to attend a lively Little League baseball game at the Wofford Field in Alma, Arkansas. The evening was filled with laughter and the cheerful sound of the crowd. Around 10:30 p.m., as the game neared its end, Morgan and her young friends asked their parents for permission to walk just a few yards away to catch fireflies in the grass. Colleen hesitated at first, but seeing the safety of the busy field, she gently agreed. Morgan was last seen alive at 10:45 p.m., standing entirely alone beside her mother's car, leaning down to tap a handful of playground sand out her shoes. A few yards away, her friends were emptying their own shoes when they noticed a strange, unsettling man approaching Morgan to strike up a brief conversation. Seconds later, the ball game concluded, and the children ran back to the stands. When Colleen walked over to her vehicle, expecting to find her daughter waiting patiently on the seat, the car was completely empty. Morgan had vanished into thin air. The realization of her sudden absence sent a wave of absolute panic through the crowd, sparking a desperate, screaming search under the dim parking lot lights. This sudden nightmare marked the end of an innocent night, leaving a mother to cope with a reality that traces directly back to the story of Morgan's happy childhood. Morgan's happy childhood. To truly understand the massive weight of this tragedy, we must look at the beautiful, bright life that was stolen away. Born on September 12, 1988, Morgan Channel Nick was a sweet, 6-year-old girl whose entire world was defined by love, laughter, and absolute innocence. Growing up in the small, close-knit town of Ozark, Arkansas, Morgan was the absolute center of her mother Colleen's universe. She was a deeply affectionate child, known for her wide, contagious smile and her pure, gentle heart. She loved doing ordinary things, playing outside, sharing secrets with her friends, and spending warm summer days wrapped up in the comforting embrace of her family. Morgan was a sweet, vibrant little girl who was completely loved by everyone who met her, her entire life ahead of her. Her childhood was an ordinary, beautiful picture of safety and peace. There were no dark shadows, no fears, and no reasons to ever suspect that the world could be a dangerous place. On that tragic Friday in June, she woke up in her own bed, completely unaware that it would be her very last morning at home. The sheer happiness of her simple life makes her story incredibly painful to hear, because she had no defense against the darkness waiting in the distance. Her innocent trust in people was everything a child should have. That beautiful, trusting nature carried her all the way to a joyful evening road trip with her mom, leading them straight to the cheering crowds of the baseball game. The baseball game, the warm summer evening of June 9th, 1995, was supposed to be a memory of pure joy. Little Morgan and her mother, Colleen, made the short journey from Ozark to the town of Alma, completely thrilled to attend a local Little League baseball game at the Wofford Field. Close friends had invited them, and the atmosphere was alive with the bright stadium lights, the sound of wooden bats cracking against baseballs, and the happy chatter of families sitting together in the bleachers. For a 6-year-old girl, the evening felt magical. As the clock crawled past 10:30 p.m., the night took on a dreamy quality as hundreds of glowing fireflies began to rise from the dark, open grass just beyond the stands. Morgan and her little friends begged their parents for permission to go catch the glowing insects, eager to stretch their legs as the game wound down. Colleen felt a brief flash of hesitation, a mother's natural instinct to keep her child close. However, looking out at the friendly, small-town crowd and surrounded by other reassuring parents, she swallowed her worry and softly smiled, letting Morgan run off to join the fun. It was a completely normal choice that any loving parent would make. The children giggled as they chased the flickering lights in the grass, completely unaware of the cold eyes watching them from the shadows of the gravel parking lot. That ordinary field meant for childhood dreams was about to become the setting for a devastating crime. When the game ended just 15 minutes later, the other children walked back alone, carrying a chilling story provided by the last witnesses. The last witnesses. The small innocence of children often shields them from seeing the true malice of the world. As the baseball game wrapped up at 10:45 p.m., Morgan's friends began knocking the playground sand out of their shoes, standing just a few dozen feet away from Colleen's car. They were completely caught up in their own little world, laughing about the fireflies they had chased. Through their young eyes, they saw Morgan leaning against the car, doing the exact same thing, emptying her shoes so she wouldn't mess up her mom's clean seats. But then a quiet shadow fell over her. Her friends later remembered seeing an unfamiliar, deeply unsettling man approach Morgan while she was trying to slip her shoes back onto her feet. To a group of 6-year-olds, he just seemed like a creepy adult asking a random question. Because they were so young, they didn't realize the extreme danger Morgan was facing. They turned away for just a few seconds to run back to their parents. When the group arrived at the stands without her, Colleen's heart instantly dropped into a cold pit of dread. Her friends innocently pointed back toward the vehicle, saying Morgan was just waiting right over there. But when Colleen reached the dark parking lot, the terrible reality set in. There was no child, no laughter, only an empty shoe print in the dirt and a vanishing trail that would eventually point directly to the main suspect. The main suspect. For decades, the search for Morgan felt like chasing ghosts through an endless, dark maze. But investigators kept returning to a sinister presence who had been under their noses from the very beginning. His name was Billy Jack Links. Links was a known, convicted child sex offender who lived right in the area when Morgan disappeared. He was a deeply troubled man who drove an old red pickup truck, a specific vehicle that witnesses had frantically reported seeing near the Wofford baseball field on that exact night. Links died alone in prison back in 2000 at 75 years old, carrying his dark, monstrous secrets to the grave without ever facing charges for Morgan's disappearance. For 21 long years after his death, it seemed like the cold truth would remain buried forever. True crime followers and local police refuse to give up, convinced that his old truck held the answers to mother's endless tears. The vehicle was preserved like a time capsule of an absolute nightmare, waiting for science to finally catch up to the horror of that summer night. The shadow of Link's memory continued to haunt every single lead, proving that some monsters stay terrifying long after they are gone. It was this lingering, painful connection that eventually forced a massive breakthrough, opening a completely new door for the FBI investigation. The FBI investigation. When a young child vanishes, the full weight of federal law enforcement drops onto the scene. The FBI immediately stepped in to assist local Alma police, turning the small Arkansas town into a command center. Agents poured over the baseball field, setting up tip lines and building a massive file on every single piece of evidence. They treated the disappearance with the absolute highest urgency, knowing that every passing hour meant the trail was growing colder. The agency utilized every resource available, from behavioral analysts to advanced forensic labs, trying to piece together the identity of the dark figure seen near Colleen's vehicle. For years, federal agents quietly held onto a crucial piece of physical evidence, the old, impounded red pickup truck once driven by Billy Jack Links. Inside that cold, silent vehicle, forensic teams work with absolute care. In November 2021, the FBI revealed a heartbreaking discovery that shattered decades of silence. Specialized lab analysts found tiny clothing fibers deep inside the truck's interior. When tested against advanced databases, those microscopic threads were a close, terrifying match to the exact cotton t-shirt Morgan was wearing on the night she disappeared. The realization that her tiny clothes had left traces in that dark cab brought her mother to tears, providing the first concrete proof of the horror Morgan faced. This devastating forensic link breathed entirely new life into a cold case, opening an unhealed wound and leading directly to new leads after decades. New leads after decades. For nearly 30 years, time stood completely still for the Nick family, frozen on that warm, tragic June night. But behind the closed doors of modern forensic laboratories, science was silently working to break the silence. On October 1st, 2024, the Alma Police Department gathered reporters for an announcement that would break the hearts of the community all over again. Advanced, highly sensitive DNA testing had finally been performed on the interior of the red truck that once belonged to the long-dead suspect, Billy Jack Links. The results were absolutely devastating. Police Chief Jeff Pointer announced to a weeping room that the new DNA evidence directly linked a member of the Nick family to the inside of that truck, proving Morgan had been in the vehicle. This heavy, modern discovery finally shattered any remaining hope that Morgan might have just wandered away or lost a memory. It was concrete, scientific proof that she had been trapped inside that tiny, dark space with a monster. Knowing that a piece of her fragile body left a permanent trace in her captor's truck brought a profound, fresh wave of grief to everyone who had ever prayed for her safe return. This long-awaited breakthrough brought a chilling form of closure, but it also opened an entirely new door of unanswered sorrow. The discovery left the world staring directly into a painful void, raising the questions that remain. The questions that remain. Even with a modern DNA match, the deepest, most agonizing secrets of that night remain entirely locked away. We now know, with painful certainty, that little Morgan was taken inside Billy Jack Link's old red truck. But the monster who built that rolling nightmare took the rest of the dark truth straight to his grave. Where did he take her after driving away from the bright baseball field lights? What were her very last thoughts as she called out for her mother in the quiet darkness? The absolute lack of a final resting place leaves a permanent, bleeding wound for Colleen, who still waits for the day she can bring her little girl home. The empty fields and isolated roads of Arkansas hold the quiet answers to Morgan's final moments, keeping a devastating secret that may never be fully spoken aloud. The active investigation continues to search for her physical remains, refusing to let her memories simply dissolve into history. But as the sun sets on Morgan's cold, unresolved trail, we are reminded that some family nightmares don't begin in the dark shadows of a summer parking lot. Sometimes, the most unbelievable, life-shattering terror strikes when the entire world is supposed to be celebrating peace, joy, and togetherness. To see how quickly safety can turn into an absolute nightmare inside a quiet family home, we must turn to the shocking event of a morning meant for presence and laughter, stepping directly into a Christmas morning horror.
911 emergency. Police, what's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. All right, please explain to me what's going on, A note was left in your daughter's phone. How old is your daughter?
6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old.
Christmas morning horror. The date was December 26, 1996, in the wealthy, quiet town of Boulder, Colorado. Inside the massive, beautiful Ramsey home at 755 15th Street, the bright joy of Christmas Day had just wound down. But at 5:52 a.m., a terrifying scream did not break the silence. Instead, a frantic 911 call from a panicked mother shattered the freezing morning air. Patsy Ramsey reported finding a bizarre, handwritten 2.5-page ransom note left on the kitchen staircase, demanding a highly specific sum of $118,000 for the safe return of her 6-year-old daughter. Just 7 agonizing hours later, a frantic search inside the house led straight to a cold, isolated room in the dark basement, uncovering a scene of absolute, heartbreaking malice. There, hidden behind a latched wooden door, lay the lifeless body of the little girl, covered under a clean white blanket. Her tiny wrists were bound, duct tape covered her lips, and a crude nylon cord garrote was tightened around her neck. The official autopsy later confirmed a brutal skull fracture and asphyxia by strangulation, proving she had been killed inside her own sanctuary while the world slept. The complete violation of a safe home on the most magical morning of the year left the entire community in absolute weeping shock. This unbelievable tragedy instantly turned a festive holiday into a permanent, chilling monument of grief, pulling back a dark curtain to reveal the life of JonBenet Ramsey. The life of JonBenet Ramsey. Before her name became a permanent headline for terror, JonBenet Patricia Ramsey was a vibrant 6-year-old girl full of laughter and big dreams. Born in Atlanta, Georgia, on August 6, 1990, she moved with her wealthy family to the quiet, upscale town of Boulder, Colorado. To the outside world, she lived a life resembling a modern fairy tale. JonBenet spent her afternoons practicing dances, smiling for cameras, and winning numerous child beauty pageants. With her bright blonde hair, custom-made dresses, and infectious charm, she took home sparkling titles like Little Miss Colorado and National Tiny Miss Beauty. Behind the heavy curtains of her family's massive home, she was just a gentle kindergarten student who loved playing with her older brother, Burke, and dreaming of the future. Her mother, Patsy, poured her heart into celebrating JonBenet's talents, creating a world where the sweet little girl was always surrounded by applause, beautiful music, and pure adoration. But looking back at old home videos of her spinning on stage, knowing the immense darkness that was waiting for her in the shadows of her own home, leaves a deep, suffocating ache in the chest. That bright, beautiful light was extinguished in the absolute worst way imaginable, leaving behind a cold grave in Georgia next to her late half-sister. The sudden, terrifying contrast between her beautiful, shining life and her horrific end makes the desperate moments of her disappearance even more unbearable to face. To truly understand how this sweet child vanished into the dark, we must listen closely to the frantic words that broke the silence at dawn, bringing us face to face with the 911 call. The 911 call. The transition from a quiet Christmas night to an absolute living nightmare began with a single panic breath. Before anyone knew that a sweet 6-year-old girl was lying lifeless in her own basement, the silence of dawn was shattered at 5:52 a.m. Patsy Ramsey grabbed the telephone, her fingers trembling as she dialed those 3 digits. When the operator answered, what followed was a torrent of breathless, raw terror. Patsy was hyperventilating, screaming into the receiver that her daughter had been kidnapped. She pleaded for help, her voice cracking with maternal desperation so visceral it leaves a hollow ache in your chest. In the background, the heavy, suffocating silence of the massive Boulder home seemed to swallow her words. According to official police transcripts, Patsy shrieked, "We have a ransom note here," while gasping for air, completely unraveling on the line. But it is the final seconds of that audio that truly haunt the soul and stay with you long after the sound stops. Believing she had successfully disconnected the line, Patsy didn't realize the operator was still listening, recording the ambient sounds of the house. In that brief, chilling window of supposed privacy, the frantic hysteria seemed to instantly shift. Voices in the room, alleged by audio experts to include John and a seemingly awake Burke, spoke in hushed, urgent tones that sounded terrifyingly calm compared to the screaming, just seconds prior. This sudden, jarring shift from absolute panic to calculated containment is where the tears turn to cold, paralyzing dread. That terrifyingly brief window of audio did not just report a missing child. It inadvertently opened a door to a deeper, darker labyrinth of deception, smoothly leading investigators directly to the ransom note mystery. The ransom note mystery. The frantic panic of that 911 call leads investigators directly into a room frozen in time, plunging them straight inside the crime scene. But it wasn't the cold basement or the undisturbed dust that halted the breath of everyone in that house. It was a stack of 3 pages left resting on a kitchen staircase, a handwritten labyrinth of ink that defies everything law enforcement ever knew about the psychology of kidnapping. The note was written using a black felt-tip pen and a notepad pulled directly from Patsy Ramsey's own desk. The phantom author sat comfortably inside a house full of sleeping people, spending nearly half an hour drafting a 2.5-page letter. In the dark history of American crime, kidnappers bring their demands with them. They do not sit down to compose an essay at the kitchen table. But it is the terrifyingly precise demand that forces a throat to tighten. $118,000. Not $1 million. Not a clean round number. It was an amount almost identical to the Christmas bonus John Ramsey had received the previous year. How could a small foreign faction know the confidential financial secrets of a local businessman? The chilling text reads like a theatrical script, echoing lines from Hollywood movies like Dirty Harry and Speed, ending with a mysterious acronym SBTC. The FBI's elite profiling unit immediately flagged the note as an elaborate staging mechanism. Forensic pathologists noted a complete absence of foreign fingerprints on the pages. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation concluded there were deep, unsettling indications matching Patsy's handwriting, though the evidence stopped just short of a definitive match. The note wasn't a communication. It was an anchor dragging the suspicion away from the shadows outside and locking it tightly within the family walls. I have never seen a note like it in my 60-year experience. I do not think it was written by an outside stranger. Dr. Michael Baden, forensic pathologist. This agonizing piece of paper didn't just demand money. It served as a calculated shield to mask a horror that had already occurred. To truly understand why this handwritten demand feels so artificial, we must look at the physical space where it was born, stepping through the doors to see the tragic reality left inside the crime scene. Inside the crime scene. To truly understand why the ransom note feels so artificially staged, we must step past the kitchen staircase and move deeper into the physical layout of the home. According to original Boulder Police Department files and the official 1996 autopsy report, the ground floor of the house remained hauntingly normal. But down a narrow flight of wooden stairs, the atmosphere shifts into suffocating darkness. The basement was a labyrinth of cold, concrete rooms, heavy with dust and the silence of a freezing Colorado winter. It was here, behind a heavy wooden door secured from the inside by a small latch, that John Ramsey carried out a search that would forever shatter the family's public reality. When he opened that latch, he found his 6-year-old daughter lying on the floor of a windowless storage room. She was covered in a white blanket, her mouth sealed with heavy duct tape, and a nylon cord bound around her wrists. The physical scene presented a series of disturbing contradictions for law enforcement. Detective Lou Smith noted a broken basement window and an unidentified boot print near the body, suggesting an outsider had breached the home. However, responding officers documented that the steel grate over that very window was shrouded in completely intact, undisturbed cobwebs. There was no missing dust, no brushed foliage, and no structural sign of a forced entry through the frozen sill. Instead, the true horror lay in the terrifyingly precise, hands-on nature of the violence. The autopsy later confirmed that a crude garrote, fashioned from a broken paintbrush taken directly from Patsy Ramsey's art supplies, had been used to slowly strangle the child. This was not a quick, detached crime of opportunity. It required an immense, localized amount of time spent in the dark, using items native to the household to commit an unspeakable act. Every piece of evidence left in that basement pointed away from a chaotic, hurried break-in, turning the investigative lens directly around. The heavy silence of the rooms didn't suggest a shadow escaping into the night. It trapped the truth inside, heavily pointing the finger at the family under suspicion. The family under suspicion. The heavy silence of those basement rooms didn't suggest a shadow escaping into the night. It trapped the truth inside, heavily pointing the finger at the family under suspicion. In the devastating days following the tragedy, the focus of the Boulder Police Department pivoted completely inward. The statistical reality that most child homicides occur at the hands of caregivers cast a dark shadow over John and Patsy Ramsey, turning their immense wealth and beautiful home into an isolated fortress of scrutiny. The public watched in absolute heartbreak as the parents of a 6-year-old child seemed to pull away from investigators, hiring defense attorneys and public relations teams rather than answering immediate, informal questions. This profound disconnect sparked severe friction between the police, who felt the family was actively protecting a secret, and the district attorney's office. The tension culminated in 1999 when a grand jury quietly voted to indict both John and Patsy for child abuse resulting in death and being accessories to the crime. Because District Attorney Alex Hunter believed the evidence could not prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt in a courtroom, he refused to sign the document, burying the indictment from public view for nearly 14 years. The weight of the suspicion fractured the community and tore the remaining family apart, creating a devastating narrative of a mother and father trapped under the microscope of a global audience. Yet, just as the walls seemed to permanently close around the grieving parents, scientific advancements did the unthinkable. The heavy fog of human suspicion suddenly collided with concrete, microscopic biology, opening a completely uncharted path into the realm of DNA evidence and conflicting forensic theories. DNA evidence and theories. The staggering realization that the Ramsey family had been formally accused by a grand jury brings the entire investigation to a breaking point, because everything the world thought it knew about this house was about to be completely dismantled by microscopic science. The human mind craves a simple narrative, but the physical evidence left inside that basement refuses to provide one. When forensic investigators examined JonBenet's body, they discovered a tiny, mixed blood sample on her underwear. In December 2003, using advanced genetic testing, scientists extracted enough material to build a partial DNA profile. It belonged to an unknown male. This genetic footprint was checked against CODIS, a national database containing over 1.6 million profiles, but it yielded no matches. Forensic Discovery Timeline. 1996. Crime Scene Compromise. Initial DNA Collection. 2003. Unidentified male DNA profile isolated from blood stain. 2008. Touch DNA analysis clears the Ramsey family. 2016. Advanced testing reveals genetic markers from 2 unknown individuals. Years later, in 2008, investigators utilized touch DNA analysis, testing the microscopic skin cells left behind when an object is handled. This new technology revealed the exact same male profile on the waistband of her leggings, suggesting that whoever killed JonBenet had touched her clothing during the assault. Former FBI profiler Candace DeLong emphasizes that because this distinct genetic profile appeared identically on multiple surfaces, it almost certainly belongs to the killer. This revelation immediately breathed new life into the intruder theory, championed by retired detective Lou Smith. Smith argued that an outsider slipped into the home through a basement window, used a stun gun to quiet the child, and left a mysterious boot print found near her body. Yet, this evidence didn't end the war theories. It only deepened the tragedy. Skeptics pointed out that the crime scene was horribly compromised within hours of discovery, as friends and investigators walked freely through the home. Former investigator Gordon Coombs noted that humans shed DNA constantly, meaning the trace samples could have been deposited by benign contact long before that night. This devastating deadlock between a mysterious genetic footprint and a highly suspicious, staged crime scene left prosecutors in absolute limbo. The evidence was profoundly conflicting, creating a legal maze that would dictate the entire fate of the prosecution. Why no one has been convicted? The true tragedy of JonBenet Ramsey's case does not just lie in that cold basement. It lies in the complete, irreversible collapse of the American justice system inside the walls of her home. No one has ever stood before a judge for her death, because from the very first hour, the physical truth was systematically erased. The foundation of any criminal conviction is a pristine crime scene, but JonBenet's was utterly destroyed. Believing it was a kidnapping, police failed to seal the house. Family, friends, and even a minister walked freely through the rooms, wiping down kitchen counters and inadvertently washing away microscopic evidence. When John Ramsey carried his daughter's lifeless body up from the basement, the remaining forensic grid was shattered. In a court of law, this creates what prosecutors call a polluted well. Defense attorneys can easily argue that any fingerprint or fiber was left by a well-meaning visitor, not a killer. This contamination created an unforgivable deadlock between the Boulder Police Department and the district attorney's office. The two agencies fiercely turned against each other, completely paralyzing the investigation. The police grew consumed by the family theory, pointing to bizarre, lengthy ransom note written on a notepad from inside the house. Yet, the district attorney's office focused heavily on the intruder theory, anchored by an unidentified male DNA profile found on JonBenét's underwear. In 1999, a grand jury actually voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey for child abuse resulting in death. But District Attorney Alex Hunter looked at the contaminated files and made a devastating choice. He refused to sign it. He knew the constitutional standard. To convict, a prosecutor must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. With two government agencies screaming completely different theories and an unknown man's DNA hovering over the evidence, a conviction was legally impossible. The system collapsed under the weight of its own errors, leaving a little girl's memory trapped forever in the space between suspicion and proof.